impact of the lockdown and the pandemic on children and workers. You might remember the NIDS-CRAM survey showing children lost so much education time. They actually learned less than half last year of what they had learnt the year before. In other words, take what they learnt in 2019, they learned less than half of that last year. At the same time, yet more evidence is women who are losing out the most in jobs, losing income. And across the board, of course, we've seen so many people losing income because of the lockdown. Well, let's speak now to Crystal Duncan-Williams, project lead at the organisation Youth Capital. Crystal, afternoon to you. I mean, before the pandemic started, over half of our young people were not in jobs. They were unemployed. They couldn't work. That number's obviously gone up dramatically. It's going to have a huge impact in our society now and in the longer term.
Absolutely, Stephen. We know that there were over 8 million young people who, as you say, were not in employment, education or training at the start of last year, and that number is continuing to rise. And as our economy shrinks, entry-level jobs become fewer, and for young people who have never had a job and have no work experience, the odds are really stacked against them in terms of getting that first job, that first work opportunity.
I mean, for a lot of people, internships was what you did in the formal economy. You got an internship. You can't go into someone's office and learn from them now.
No, and I think that's also what we're hearing from young people and from employers themselves. You know, any work-based learning, learnership, internship opportunities, when COVID restrictions limit the number of people in any kind of working environment, obviously employers' first priority is to get their full-time permanent staff back. And so young people are again left out in the cold. And so, you know, this is where things like the Basic Education Employment Initiative comes in, where government is trying to give young people, you know, short-term opportunities to gain some work experience. But, you know, how do these short-term opportunities really translate into any meaningful career pathing for young people is a question we have at Youth Capital and are posing to the government.
Well, this is what comes next. If people are losing out on education, they aren't finishing school. I mean, and I've often used the phrase, they're betrayed by the education system. What ways work to make up the difference? And I mean, there are some programs, but some ways are probably more effective than others to try and help people get a proper education.
Absolutely. We know there are many faults with our education system, and they existed long before COVID. And as you say, now we're in an even worse space than we were before. I think last year, the same research team from NIDS-CRAM came up with the estimate that it would take us 8 years to get back to where we were pre-COVID, which wasn't in the best places, as I'm sure many are aware. You know, we've been asking the DBE in many interviews to say, where's this catch-up plan? What are you doing to work with schools? I know that many organizations put forward the proposal of slimming down the curriculum. You know, what have we done in terms of slimming down the curriculum to really the core components to get young people in school to be able to make up those learning deficits? And then for those who completed matric and maybe failed or didn't get the marks they were hoping to get because of COVID, you know, there's the Second Chance program. The first round of exams are taking place at the end of this month and the beginning of June. How can we support these young people to complete in the second time around using online resources? There are NGOs that are supporting young people to study for these exams. So there are some programs in place, but their effectiveness is questionable.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, are we doing the wrong program? Is it actually a lot harder to help people catch up once they come out of the school system than we think it is? I mean, is that maybe the issue?
Absolutely, Stephen. We commissioned a report called Matrics on the Fringe with Stellenbosch University, and you know what we find is that again, the older you are, the harder it is to complete your matric. You're out of school, you're out of the supportive environment of a school. You don't have a teacher to help you. You don't have textbooks, because if you're in a government school, you give your textbooks back when you leave, and you're left on your own to kind of study for these exams. And that's in most cases, it's far harder for young people to complete. And so I think the you know, biggest goal we should have is to support young people while they are in school. You know, academic support, psychosocial support is a huge issue. Many young people have been traumatized in various ways by the COVID pandemic, and we need to address all of these if we want to help young people catch up.
So, I mean, Crystal, one of the problems that we have is that you don't want people to be in a school when there's too big an age gap between them and younger children coming through or younger learners coming through. So, for example, it's allowed, but it may be a bit difficult to have, say, someone who's 22 in the same school as someone who's 12 or 13. Where I'm trying to go with this is, do we need to maybe have some kind of new phase of schooling that would kick in, you know, for people between, say, 18 and 25, that actually will do some of that support? You would teach perhaps in a different way, you'd have different resources, but it would be going to an institution providing the same kind of support that people would have had if they'd received the right opportunity at a school.
It's interesting you mentioned that as an intervention, Stephen. The community colleges is something that was kind of tabled by the Department of Higher Education, I think probably about a year or two ago, possibly longer than that. And we haven't really seen that take off, and I think that is that space that could become, that learning space for young people that have dropped out and are older. The former ABET classes where adults who had not completed matric could go and do English and Afrikaans, and I think it was 4 subjects is what they propose now through the community colleges. But again, this, as with many things, sits in a policy document and has not really been realized. Sites have been identified, and these community colleges are supposed to also then be supportive places for young people who want to access second chance matric, and I think they could play a role here. But as I say, whether that policy is actually being implemented on the ground is not been my experience.
What's also fascinating, if we look at income and we look at people who have lost income and lost jobs, women have been hit far harder than men, and I know a lot of that is actually about childcare. It's also about the genderized nature of work.
Absolutely, Stephen. And, interesting, in our report, Matrics on the Fringe, where we look at the second chance matric program, what we did as part of that analysis is to look at the level of qualifications, the male versus female, and the levels of employment. And interestingly, when we look at one snapshot in 2019, what we see is at every level, whether you're talking matric, diploma, university degree, for between the ages of 31 and 35, more females than males have qualifications at that level. However, more males are employed than females with the same qualification level. And I think this latest NIDS-CRAM results just drives that home when correcting for all other factors. What they're calling the gender penalty is huge for women. And they say, needs further research. Obviously, a large part of it we saw with COVID across the world, not just in South Africa, that women were the ones who bore the brunt of giving up work or taking on less work to cover childcare responsibilities when schools and daycares were closed. And I don't think that women have recovered from that. And I think the gender differences and the discrepancies that women face in the workplace have just been highlighted by COVID. We need more supportive working environments for women who are mothers, and more support in the form of maybe a basic income grant, or the child support grant. It goes to the child, it's not for the mother. And so I think it's important in South Africa that we start thinking about these different measures so that we can support young women to be part of the workforce.
I mean, obviously we've known about the gender pay gap for quite some time. This shows how big it is, how bad it is, the genderized nature of it. But it would probably take quite a radical intervention to change society in a way to kind of stop this gap. And I know some societies have tried. It seems to me quite hard to do, and there would probably be opposition.
Absolutely, and I'm not saying it's going to be easy. And in terms of support, I know that if you look at places like the US, in terms of our maternity benefits, we are in a better place, at least on paper, than some of first world countries or developed nations. But I think that COVID, like with everything, the pandemic has given us a chance to do things differently and build back better, as everybody's saying. The appetite for a basic income grant, which we're saying, initially maybe it's targeted. Maybe you target young female work seekers as a start, because we know that money is not infinite. But I think we have to try something. Another area is an ECD sector that's functional. If women had a safe space where they could leave their children when they went to work, that would also help. So I think it's like with many things in the youth unemployment space, it's a multi-sectoral problem, but we need to start somewhere.
It's such a big conversation. I mean, when we talk about childcare and what's happened in the ECD Centre, the Early Childhood Development Centre, I mean, many of those places haven't been receiving the subsidy. Some are still, I think, closed. I mean, I'm at a loss, actually, to understand what government is trying to do here.
Yeah, so there were some grants made available for kind of small ECD centres, and the DG Murray Trust has been doing quite a lot of work trying to help small kind of fledgling ECD centres to access that money. And my understanding has been that the rollout of that money has been quite difficult and hard to access. And I saw on Twitter yesterday that ECD sector is still saying that they need more support and they need more support from government. So I think that, as with everything, we are waiting for government to step up. And in the meantime, what is happening is that the centres are closing down, and they already have at a rapid rate. We heard of many centres closing down over COVID because, if the kids aren't coming, parents aren't paying fees, and then schools are forced to close. And at the end of the day, I guess, again, women are suffering having to care for their children, and the children are suffering because they aren't getting that development at that early stage.
Crystal Duncan-Williams, Project Lead at Youth Capital, I really appreciate the time. Thanks very much indeed. An important series of conversations there. Well, coming up in the next hour, we'll be discussing